What if the real story of San Francisco in the 1910s was very different from the one most people remember? Behind the rebuilt skyline and the grand celebrations after the 1906 disaster, there were quieter stories that rarely appeared in official history. Welcome to TimeEcho Lens, where we explore the forgotten corners of the past. If you enjoy thoughtful history like this, please consider subscribing and sharing this video so more people can discover these hidden stories. Some images in this video are symbolic recreations and may not perfectly match every historical detail, and we appreciate your understanding. I hope this journey gives you a calm and reflective moment with history. Now, let us step back into San Francisco of the 1910s. In April 1906, San Francisco was nearly erased in a matter of days. The earthquake and the fires that followed destroyed almost 5 square miles of the city and more than 28,000 buildings. Entire neighborhoods collapsed into rubble. Streets that once held homes, shops, and churches became fields of ash and twisted metal. For many residents, the disaster did not end when the shaking stopped. Families lived in temporary camps for months, sometimes years, trying to rebuild their lives piece by piece. By the early 1910s, city leaders were determined to show the world a different image. They wanted San Francisco to appear modern, progressive, and healthy. Officials promoted new construction, improved streets, and a sense that the city had fully recovered. The most powerful symbol of this message arrived in 1915 with the Panama Pacific International Exposition. Visitors from around the world came to admire grand buildings, fine art, and new technologies. The fair celebrated what organizers called the progress of civilization, and San Francisco stood proudly at the center of that story. Yet everyday life in the city told a more complicated truth. But beneath the impressive architecture and the confident speeches, many communities still faced hardship and exclusion. The rebuilt skyline suggested triumph, but for many residents, the deeper struggles of the city had never truly disappeared. A few miles from the bright lights of San Francisco, another reality existed that most visitors in the 1910s never saw. On Angel Island, in the middle of the bay, the United States opened a new immigration station in 1910. Today, it is often compared to Ellis Island in New York, but its purpose was very different. For many immigrants arriving from Asia, Angel Island was not a welcoming gateway. It was a place of suspicion, confinement, and long uncertainty. The station played a central role in enforcing the Chinese Exclusion Act, a federal law that severely restricted immigration from China. Officials used Angel Island as a detention and inspection center designed to control who could enter the country. Between 1,910 and 1,940, about 175,000 Chinese immigrants passed through its wooden barracks and interrogation rooms. Many expected that the sight of San Francisco across the water meant they were close to a new life. Instead, they often found themselves locked inside the station for weeks or even months. The process began with strict medical examinations. Doctors inspected immigrants for illnesses such as hookworm or trachoma. These conditions were sometimes used as reasons to deny entry. Even healthy people feared the medical checks because a single diagnosis could end their journey immediately. After the examinations came the interrogations. Special inquiry boards questioned immigrants in extraordinary detail about their families and villages in China. These interviews could last for hours and were sometimes repeated over several days. Officials compared every answer with records and with statements given by relatives already living in the United States. A small mistake could destroy a case. Something as simple as giving the wrong number of steps leading to a family home or misremembering the position of a rice storage bin might be treated as proof of dishonesty. When that happened, the immigrant could be ordered to return across the Pacific. Faced with this system, many migrants developed strategies to survive it. Some relied on what became known as coaching papers. These documents contained detailed family histories and village descriptions that immigrants memorized before leaving China. They studied them for months so their answers would match the records used by immigration officials. As ships approached San Francisco Bay, many destroyed the papers to avoid discovery. Inside the wooden detention barracks, the emotional strain was intense. Some immigrants waited in uncertainty while watching ships arrive and depart without them. To express their frustration and loneliness, Many detainees carved or wrote poetry directly into the walls of the buildings. The poems spoke about humiliation, anger, and longing for families left behind across the ocean. They also revealed a deep awareness of the injustice they felt. For decades, these voices remained largely hidden from the wider public. Visitors to San Francisco celebrated the city's recovery and its modern image, while the quiet stories written on the walls of Angel Island stayed out of sight. Yet those poems and memories remind us that the history of the city in the 1910s was not only about rebuilding streets and grand exhibitions. It was also about thousands of people waiting on an island in the bay, hoping that the promise of America would one day open its doors to them. For many immigrants who managed to enter San Francisco in the 1910s, life in the city was far from easy. Behind the busy streets and new buildings, immigrant families worked quietly to survive in a society that often treated them as outsiders. Among those who experienced the greatest changes were Chinese immigrant women. For some of these women, arriving in America meant a shift in family life. In traditional households in southern China, young wives often lived under the strict authority of their husbands' mothers. Life in San Francisco could be different. Many women became active partners in supporting the household. Instead of remaining only inside the home, they worked beside their husbands and helped sustain the family economy. Their work often took place in small businesses that served immigrant communities. In laundry shops, they helped wash, dry, and press clothing from early morning until late at night. In modest restaurants, they assisted with cooking, serving food, and managing payments. Some women also worked as seamstresses, repairing garments or sewing clothing for customers who lived nearby. These jobs required long hours and constant effort, but they were essential for families trying to build a stable life in a new country. Even with this shared responsibility, the emotional cost could be heavy. Many women lived far from relatives and familiar traditions. Language barriers and discrimination limited their social circles. Historical accounts describe how some women appeared careworn by middle age, worn down by years of work and isolation. Their experiences remind us that the story of San Francisco in the 1910s was not only about rebuilding a city, but also about the quiet endurance of families who labored every day to remain part of it. While San Francisco worked hard to present itself as a modern and respectable city in the 1910s, another side of urban life still survived along the waterfront. This area was known as the Barbary Coast. Its reputation had begun during the gold rush of the 19th century, when thousands of sailors, miners, and fortune seekers flooded into the city. By the early 20th century, the district still carried the legacy of that rough and restless era. The Barbary Coast was widely known for gambling houses, dance halls, prostitution, and various forms of organized vice. Visitors could walk down streets filled with music, alcohol, and bright lights late into the night. Police raids happened from time to time, yet the district continued to operate in one form or another, supported by networks of business owners and political protection that had developed over decades. At the same time, the neighborhood also played an unexpected role in the cultural life of the city. Music drifted from its clubs and dance halls, and early forms of jazz began to reach local audiences. For some residents, the Barbary Coast represented moral decline. For others, it reflected the restless energy of a port city shaped by sailors, migrants, and constant movement across the Pacific. In 1918, another crisis arrived in San Francisco, one that was far less visible than the earthquake, but just as frightening for the people who lived there. The Spanish influenza spread rapidly across the world, and the city government faced enormous pressure to show that it could control the outbreak. Mayor James Rolfe Jr. and public health officials promoted a strong public response that framed the fight against the disease as both a scientific mission and a civic duty. San Francisco became one of the first American cities to require the public wearing of gauze masks. Residents were urged to wear them in streets, workplaces, and public transportation. Newspapers and officials described the masks as a reliable protection against infection, even though medical evidence at the time was still uncertain. The policy quickly became a symbol of the city's determination to stop the disease. Authorities also presented their response as an example for the rest of the country, claiming that San Francisco had created one of the most successful systems for controlling the epidemic. Yet the reality inside the city was far more complicated. The effects of the pandemic were not felt equally across all neighborhoods. Immigrant communities often face conditions that made the spread of disease more severe, while also experiencing blame from public officials and newspapers. In North Beach, where many Italian immigrants lived, families often crowded into poorly ventilated tenement buildings near the waterfront. These conditions made it easier for illness to spread quickly among residents. Historical records show that death rates in some of these blocks were among the highest in the city. Despite the difficult living conditions, public discussions sometimes portrayed the Italian community as resistant to health regulations. This narrative placed responsibility on the residents themselves rather than acknowledging the structural conditions they faced. Chinatown experienced a different but equally complex situation. After decades of discrimination and restrictive immigration policies, many Chinese residents had little trust in government medical authorities. Instead, families often relied on their own community institutions, including the Tunghua dispensary and traditional medical practices that had long served the neighborhood. Because of this independence, many illnesses and deaths were handled within the community rather than reported through official city channels. This separation had an unexpected political effect. When death statistics were published, the numbers did not always fully represent what was happening inside Chinatown. As a result, the official record suggested that San Francisco had managed the epidemic more effectively than many other cities. The image of success strengthened the reputation of local leaders, even though the full human cost was far more complicated than the public narrative suggested. Looking back today, the pandemic in San Francisco reveals another layer of the city's history in the 1910s. It reminds us that public health policies were shaped not only by medical concerns, but also by politics, social divisions, and the ways different communities were understood by those in power. For the people who lived through those months of fear and uncertainty, the experience was not simply about masks or regulations. It was about how a city responded to crisis and how some voices were heard more clearly than others. Even as San Francisco rebuilt itself during the 1910s, the physical landscape of the city carried a quiet reminder of the catastrophe of 1906. The earthquake had left behind enormous mountains of rubble. Broken bricks, twisted metal, and fragments of entire buildings had to be cleared before reconstruction could begin. One of the solutions the city adopted was to move much of this debris toward the edge of the bay. Millions of tons of ruins were dumped into the water to create new land along the shoreline. These areas, often called filled land, allowed the city to expand and provided space for new roads, warehouses, and commercial buildings. At first, this seemed like a practical and efficient way to rebuild quickly. The skyline began to rise again, and Market Street soon displayed modern structures that symbolized confidence and recovery. Yet many residents quietly questioned the stability of this new ground. People who had experienced the terrifying shaking of 1906 often felt uneasy about living on land created from debris and sand. Engineers and city planners understood that filled land could behave differently during future earthquakes. Beneath the impressive buildings and busy streets, the foundation of parts of the city remained uncertain. For many San Franciscans, this reality served as a lasting reminder that rebuilding a city after disaster is not only about constructing new walls and towers. It is also about learning to live with the memory of how fragile the ground beneath those structures can truly be. When we look back at San Francisco in the 1910s, we begin to see a city that lived in two very different realities at the same time. On the surface, it appeared confident, modern, and full of promise. Visitors who arrived in the city could admire new buildings rising along Market Street, busy streetcars moving through crowded avenues, and the grand celebration of the Panama Pacific International Exposition in 1915. To the outside world, San Francisco seemed to be a symbol of resilience. After the devastation of 1906, the city presented itself as proof that progress and determination could rebuild almost anything. But if we look more closely at the lives of ordinary people, another story begins to appear. Only a short distance from the fairgrounds and elegant neighborhood stood Angel Island, where thousands of immigrants were detained and questioned under strict immigration laws. In parts of the city, immigrant families worked long hours in small businesses simply to survive. often facing discrimination and social barriers that limited their opportunities. The political atmosphere of the era also revealed deeper tensions. During the influenza pandemic of 1918, public health policies became closely connected with political reputation and public image. Different communities experienced the crisis in different ways, and not every voice was equally heard in official records. For many residents, the real history of San Francisco in the 1910s was not found in the official celebrations or impressive architecture. It was found in the everyday struggles of people who lived quietly behind the scenes. Their stories remind us that the rebuilding of a city is never only about stone, steel, and grand events. It is also about the human experiences that shape life beneath the skyline. When I think about San Francisco in the 1910s, I believe the real story is not found in the new buildings or in the grand World's Fair that impressed visitors. The deeper truth lives in the quieter lives of ordinary people. It lives in the paper sons who struggled for a chance to enter a new country. It lives in immigrant women who worked long, exhausting days to support their families. It lives in communities pushed to the margins while the city tried to present a perfect image to the world. For me, this history reminds us that rebuilding a city is not only about architecture, it is about resilience and human endurance after tragedy. The images you saw in this video were created with artificial intelligence to help visualize these historical moments more clearly as we explored the story together. If this video made you think, I would truly love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Please consider subscribing to TimeEcho Lens and remember to like and share this video so more people can discover these forgotten stories of history.